Well, good morning. Grace and peace to you. And a happy Mother's Day. That's the reason for the flower, of course. We're blessed to have good mothers when it happens for you. And I had a good one. And she taught me and read the Word of God to me. And that's a blessing. And so it's Mother's Day, you know. There's a passage in the book of Judges. Deborah is the only female judge that we have a record of. The only one that was there. When after the battle and she had won with the help of Barak, she sings a song. And in it she calls herself a mother in Israel. And so I thought we ought to look at some mothers in Israel for a few moments this morning. You know, the Judges is a pretty difficult time. And if you read through the scriptures there, that's a horrendous time really in Israel. And then you come on this refreshing and delightful story in the time of the Judges. It's a book that follows the Judges itself. It's sandwiched in between and it's elbowed on both sides by ugliness. You've got the Judges in the period of that time, and then on the other side you've got Samuel and his sons and how they fail, and then all of King Saul and all of that. So here's this wonderful, beautiful little piece of literature. Amidst all this confusion is friendship and love and romance, and who doesn't like everybody? All the world loves a lover, don't they say that? And through this terrain of darkness that you come upon this surprise, it's like a spring bubbling in the desert. It's like finding roses in icebergs. And if you hadn't read that book lately, you ought to go and read it. The book of Ruth. One of the sweetest and most tender stories, delicate, winsome. You know, there's a lot of good literature. I like Wordsworth. He wrote well. He penned words I like real well. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vale and hill, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. And can't you just see that? He's painted that with words. And it's simply called Daffodils. Or the wry humor of Robert Burns. He's another one of my favorites, that Irish poet. He's gone to church one day. There's a very fine lady. She's rich. She's got a beautiful new hat on. And she's sitting in front of him. And she's singing her heart out. And he sees a louse in her hair. And so he wrote Ode to a Louse and gave us that great expression, you know, would someone the gift to give us to see ourselves as others see us. Great pieces of literature, but you won't find anything greater and more beautiful and more exquisite than this little piece of literature about Ruth. So let's look at this scene for a few minutes. The author gives us a picture. He sets us down in a strange place, but the human characters are just very ordinary, very much the same. And he gives us this witchery of romance and poetry. What's happened? Well, the rains have failed. The harvests are just very meager, almost nothing. And lots of people are starving. And he tells us about a little family there, and he gives us the name of the man. You and I don't know it until I come and read it again. I can't remember the name of the father. And I don't remember the name of the two sons too well. But I remember the mother. I remember the mother. The father is Elimelech. The sons are Mahlon and Chilion. And the mother, you know, is Naomi. And we want to talk about that mother and the mother-in-law that she is. Elimelech comes home, and he's been out day after day, and he comes home and he says, Naomi, there's just no work here, and I cannot find bread. And the only good news I got for you is that there is rain in Moab, and we can go there. Now, she doesn't want to do that. She's got these 2 boys, and mother's thinking about how to raise them. And if we go into a pagan land, that's just a bunch of pagans. Even though they are distant cousins, they are pagans of the first order. And I hate to take the boys there. Just think, they may even marry one of those Moabite women. But despite the sadness and the danger that she feels is there, she has to go. She's driven by hunger. And so this little family picks up what they have left to carry, and driven and scourged by hunger, they make their way away from their land of their fathers to the land of Moab. You know, Elimelech thought that, well, they may just kill us. That's, but it's either that or starve to death. But they were received pretty well, weren't they? The reception was better than they expected. And so they get to be at home in Moab. The boys are like all children. It doesn't bother them who they play with. They're true Democrats. Now, that's not a Democratic Party. The Democrats and the Republicans are both Democrats. They're both people who believe in the equality of man. All men are created equal, and we believe that, and they believe that, both parties. But these boys are true Democrats. They'll play with anybody. It doesn't matter about race. They play with the son of a scrub woman or the son of the queen. It doesn't make any difference. And so the years pass quickly there. Things move along. You know what the record says, and when the song alluded to it, or the psalm we read made something of an allusion to it. I believe it was Solomon said that life is faster than a weaver's shuttle. You ever watched a weaver's shuttle? That's how fast the days are flying in Moab for Elimelech and Naomi. And so the boys are growing up. And they've been playing with everybody. And lo and behold, one day they come in and they say, Mom and Dad, I want you to meet these 2 girls. One's named Orpah and one is named Ruth. Here, you need to know them because we want to marry them. Horrible thought to Naomi. They're going to marry a pagan. What will happen? They're going to break the law of Moses and marry one of these pagans. What can we do? Now, I want to tell you about that Orpah a little bit. I had a person that graduated from my high school years ago, and she's famous, and you know her, and her name is Oprah, and her mother named her after Orpah. She just confused the P and the R, but that's how she got her name, from Orpah. And I don't know whether I'll be calling her Orpah or Oprah today. At any rate, they're going to marry these boys. She said, now, I'm sure when the girls left, she said, now look, you really need to rethink this. You don't need to marry these girls. But to stop a young person in love from marrying who they're going to love and who they love, it's like standing in front of Niagara and trying to stop and say, boo! You won't do it. And you won't stop these boys either. And so they marry. Now, what is this godly mother and father going to do? Well, now, you could just tell them, look here, we're not going to have anything to do with you. You have made a mistake, and we're not going to do it, and just don't come around. Now, some people do that. Or we're not going to talk to them, or we're not going to treat them right. But that isn't what these people do. That might be the usual thing, but not with Naomi. She had better sense. She took them into her home and into her heart completely. And so that's the only promise for a remedy on this. But by and by, disaster comes. Elimelech dies, the father, the husband. She's now a widow, and she's homeless. She's childless. What can she do? Here are Ruth and Orpah looking at her. They saw her in joy. They saw her in sorrow. They saw her with a quiet face. They saw a person with a quiet step. They knew that she was held in her arms, in the everlasting arms, and was surrounded by them. And so they just watched that and they saw that. Ruth saw it. Well, there's a final disaster. Finally, both boys die. Now, she's completely alone. There are no bonds there. Nothing to hold her in Moab any longer. She can return to Bethlehem, and so she decides to go. And the decision is made. They're talking over, and the night before, and then that day, the next day, why? These two girls go with her. The two daughters-in-law accompany her to the Jordan at the border of Moab into the land of Benjamin and Judah. And so they go with her. They're going to make their farewells there. And so they begin the journey. Now, Orpah. Orpah really loves her mother-in-law. She hugs her, tells her with tears she's going to miss her, and then she turns back to home of her parents. And then it's Ruth's turn. And Ruth hugs her mother like Judy hugs somebody. You know, Judy will just hug you and she won't let you go. You've known that. That's the way with Ruth here. She's holding on to her mother-in-law to tell her goodbye, but she's not going to do that. She can't do that. Holding her tightly. Finally, Naomi says to her, now, you're going to have to catch up with your sister. She's almost around the corner of the road there. You need to go. You need to go. I hope that each of you finds rest with your husband. She even says that to them. But Ruth only clings the more tightly, just like Judy. Ruth makes a confession. And there's no finer point of tenderness and beauty than you're here. You know, we're all a little older, but we're not too old to love a love story. There's another piece of literature about a love story like this, similar to this. It's Sir Thomas More. You're familiar with him a little bit, an English poet. And he has married a young woman, a beautiful young lady. And in the first year, she contracts smallpox, and she's got her face very disfigured. So she shut herself up in her room and pulled the blinds, and it's all dark, and she's locked the door, as it were. And nobody can come in. She doesn't want them to see her, hide her face. And so what will Sir Thomas More do? Well, he sits down one night to write of his feelings about her and about her situation. And in the morning, he slips in the door, and she says, get out, get out, get out. He says, no, let me just finish what I've got to say. And so he reads her the poem. Believe me, if all those endearing young charms which I gaze on so fondly today were to fade in my arms like fairy gifts fleeting away, thou wouldst still be adored as this moment thou art. Let thy loveliness fade as it will. And around the dear ruin each wish of my heart would entwine itself verdantly still. Now that's beautiful. But you won't find any finer confession of faith than that of Ruth. You know, it's a beautiful confession of one man to another woman, to a woman. But Ruth's confession is from a woman to a woman. And stranger yet, it's from a woman to a mother-in-law. That creature of butt of all jokes, dynamite to a lot of marriages. But that's not so with this marriage. And that's not so with this mother-in-law. Here, youth clinging to age. Springtime, holding on to winter. June flinging its arms around the neck of November. Naomi is just being hugged to death, as it were. And so she speaks to Ruth and she says, now, Ruth, there, you must be going. You must leave. Your sister is already around the corner and you won't be able to catch up with her. And Ruth clings all the closer, even more tightly. And as she hugs her around the neck and whispers in her ear, these words fall from her lips, the most beautiful confession of love that you'll find. Entreat me not to leave thee, nor to turn from following after thee. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. And there, where you die, I will die. Your people shall be my people, and your God will be my God. And the Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part you and me. Now, you can't beat that. That's why it's in all the weddings around, you know. You hear it there. You hear it quite often. This confession is more than a confession of love. This is a confession of faith. She's made a decision. Your God will be my God. All the gods of Moab, the Baals and the Ashtaroth that are there, that's behind me. I know there's another God who is eternal. And so, there's nothing for Naomi to do but to just turn and go. And so they cross the Jordan and they climb the hill and they get up to Bethlehem, and the little townspeople there are given a very strange sight. Here come these two women down the road into town. They are obviously poverty-stricken. They're homeless. It's a Jew and a pagan. That in itself, it has enough strangeness about it. But they come in, and sad and bitter days follow because they are without any hope. And Ruth determines that what I'm going to do is, and she tells Naomi, she said, I'm going to go glean in the fields. I'll get us something to eat by gleaning in the fields. You know, there was a passage in the law of Moses that when you gleaned in the field, what you left, you had to leave because the poor people were going to come behind and pick that up. And that's what she's going to do. She's going to be among the gleaners. Not just gleaning for the landlords, but she's going to go and be there are those who glean just to make a living, just to have something to eat. And so that was the law that was given. You couldn't go into the corner. When you made that turn into the corner, you just had to leave that corner alone so that the poor could eat. And so she says to Naomi, says, I'll go into the field now, and I'll gather us some food. We'll have something. Now here's the providence of God. This is how he comes about it. And this is why he gave those two little snippets of genealogy, Brandon, down at the end of that. I can't do it as well as he did, but that down at the end of that book of Ruth is this genealogy that comes to us. And so she goes out into the fields. And I like the way it says it in chapter 2 and verse 3 of the book of Ruth. She happened to come to that part of the field that belonged to Boaz. And guess what? He's a relative. That's even better. That's even better because a relative has an obligation under the law of Moses. And here's this landlord, Boaz. What's he like? Well, he's not a real young man, but he's a young man, and he's vigorous. He's a generous kind of fella. Well, just the story when he comes up and meets his field workers. He greets them, hello, and they say to him, the Lord bless you, because he's just given them a blessing. That's the kind of fella he is. And he's religious. He's a man of faith. He's going to follow the law of Moses and what it says do about your relatives that have lost their father or their mother or their son or their husband, particularly the husband. And so, how is this? God's work. You know, when I think of her going out, there were lots of fields in the town of Bethlehem that she could have gone to, and they were all gleaning through all these fields, and she could have gone to any of them, but the record says she happened to go to the field of Boaz. Now, how do you think that came about? Was that just happenstance? I think he's telling us what he's talking about. The providence of God put her in that field because that's where he wanted her, next to Boaz. And so Boaz looks out on this field and he sees this young maid and says, you know, she's a stranger. Who is she? And he asks somebody. Oh, that's the little Moabite girl that came with Naomi. You know, they're over there. They're pretty poor. She's trying to get some food. And so he goes out and he talks to her. He says, now I'll tell you, you just keep gleaning and you stay here with my people and you stay with them. Because if you get out in this other part of the field, these people, I don't know what they'll do to you, but you stay with my people. And my young men have been told that they're supposed to take care of you. And when you get thirsty, well, our station is over there and we've got water. And you come and you get your water over there. And when noontime comes, come on back over there. We're going to have a lunch. And so when lunchtime comes, why, he gives her a big portion of food, which she had nothing when she got there and was going to have to eat raw grain. You know, at the end of the day, she makes her way home, and at the end of the day, he's giving her a little extra food she's got. And when she gets to the house, do you think she's got a story to tell Naomi? Boy, I've got something to tell you, Naomi. Now, you think Naomi's interested in that at all? No. She's a woman, too. We can see across the centuries the flush that comes to her face and the sparkle in her eyes as she listens to the story of what happened to Ruth that day with Boaz in the field. She's a matchmaker, too, you know. And so, she sees what's going on with these two young people, particularly over the next few days as this same pattern goes on, and every day she eats in the tent there with the rest of Boaz's workers and people, and he knows the conversation and hears something of those snippets of talk that she gives with him, and so finally she tells her how to take care of this, and there's a convoluted story about how they come to it, but she marries and they live happily ever after. That's not all of it, is it? What's the reason? There's a reason why this whole thing is coming to their marriage. At any rate, they marry. And what lessons can we glean from these two ladies, Ruth and Naomi? Who is the heroine? Well, of course, everybody gives, in the title of the book, gives first place to Ruth. And I would not detract from Ruth at all. She's a very lovable person. And she's one that's interested. And she's probably may be first. But I'd give first place, along with some others, to Naomi. Not that she's more winsome than this lovable little lady, Ruth. Not for that, but because she accounts for Ruth, doesn't she? She's why Ruth is in the field of Boaz. She's why Ruth marries Boaz, because she went to that land and brought her back. What kinds of lessons can we learn? Well, if we were to sit down with Naomi and to talk to her at her father's house today, I think the first thing she'd tell us, don't you, is this, that life's greatest losses may, by God's grace, become life's greatest gains, some of His best gifts. Now, when she came back, when she left, she was hunger-driven. It was a hard time. She was going where she didn't want to go. She was leaving everything she'd grown up with, and she was jeopardizing her boys by moving and making this move. And yet, it was God's providence that put her there and put her in the land of Moab. And so she realizes that, and she tells us that God was sending me to find Ruth. That's what we want. We want Ruth. There's a reason for that. And then she says, I was at home there too. I felt good there. And then I lost my husband, I lost my boys. You see, life's greatest calamities, the greatest difficulties, sometimes bring about, by God's grace, some of His greatest gifts to us. And she learned another lesson. The art of capitalizing on her gifts, on her calamities rather. You know, I've seen a lot of people in life that when hard times come, when calamity strikes, they turn against God, you know. Why is God doing this to me? God did this to me. And they just get... I know one lady that she just absolutely quit the church altogether because of some calamity that came to her. That wasn't true with Naomi. Amidst the pain and suffering, she kept her faith. You know what Paul said in Romans 8 and verse 23, I think it is, all things work together for good to them that love God and are the called according to His purpose. Now, I don't know whether I believe that passage may well include such things as calamities and vicissitudes of life and changes that come that affect us adversely and we don't like. And God may be doing something good for us. I don't know that. But I do know what James 1 and verse 3 says. And this, it does make it clear. Know this, that the trying of your faith works patience, and patience will have its final work to make you complete. You see, things happen and come to us in life, and these calamities come, and we can either turn it away and blame God, or we can use it to increase our faith. And that's what Naomi did. She just went stronger and stronger in her belief of the Lord. You know, she says, when I left, I never dreamed that we'd be so enriched by Ruth and by her family. She never dreamed that she would be the greatest light bringer of all the centuries. But that's the case. We would not know. We could not do without Naomi to bring us Ruth. She was the one that brought her here. When you think about it, how did Ruth have this great faith? How did Ruth come to that? How did she come to a knowledge of God? How could she stand there at the Jordan and speak in her mother's ear and say, your people are going to be my people? She never had seen those people. She never had talked to them. Why would she be willing to take them in? There are all kinds of terrible people over in the land of Canaan, and yet she believed that she could find in the house of Naomi and in the town of Naomi people who were good and kind. And that's what she was going to do. Now, how'd she come to that faith? It was by her association with her mother-in-law, wasn't it? That's why that we needed Naomi, because we needed Ruth. Well, a few years go by, or a few days probably. One day the sweet angel of suffering comes to the house of this stranger living in Moab, and she holds her firstborn in her arms. You know, she was married over there to one of those boys, and she was over in Moab. Ruth had a family, but she had no children. They were there 10 years, and Ruth and Orpah, neither one had a child. But when she came home, and when she married Boaz, here came this baby. This baby, Obed. But that's where you get the genealogy, because more years go by, and there's another baby born in this family. This is a baby that sunshine is tangled in his hair and songs are in his heart. And he sings and he battles and he sins and he repents. And everybody loves, and we thank God for David the king. And he's another grandbaby for Ruth. Years go by, a lot of years, and there's a light that bursts on the Judean hills one night. And behold, there were shepherds abiding in the fields, keeping watch over their flocks by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them, and they were sore afraid. And the angel said, "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, what shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David, in Bethlehem, a Savior, who is Christ the Lord." And he's another grandbaby that Ruth had, that came in that family. The providence of God bringing about the salvation of the world. You know, he could not have done without Naomi. Naomi was the road whereby he walked, God walked, to bring us to Ruth and to this grandbaby that is born in Bethlehem that night that the angels sang, where this choir from a country where everybody sings was singing about this son, her boy, Ruth's. Naomi did that, and God used her. You see, God uses us in lots of ways, but He brought to us salvation through Christ our Lord. And so I would say to you that if you haven't obeyed Him in the gospel, if you haven't received the salvation and the grace that He brings, then you ought to do that today, and we'll be glad to help you with that. In either way, won't you come as we stand and sing?